Ultimately, I lost all faith in this species and in my nation's culture a long time ago. I got a divorce, and I needed it.
I hear that'll do it, yeah.
I found that, artistically, to tell you the truth, as a writer, it gives you an emotional separation from the outcome. A lot of comedians I hear, when they complain about stuff, they seem to imply that everything could be all right if we just do this or just do that. I don't care. It's never going to work. If you think there's a solution, you're part of the problem. That's what I believe. So, I guess it's true. They know.
How's that bumper sticker selling?
Yeah, it should. But I root ultimately for the big comet or the big asteroid to come here and get things right. Because what happened is we would never have emerged from the ferret stage. The mammals would never risen if it weren't for that comet that wiped out the dinosaurs.
The dinosaurs killed them, yeah.
The second comet is due to get things back in balance. And what I want for it to do as a poetic touch, I want for it to come through the hole in the ozone layer. Wouldn't that be nice? And I want it to happen east of me so I can watch it on CNN for about 18 hours before the dust cloud reaches my house. It's just the way I am.
So would you say that you hate people?
Don't do drugs, kids.
No, individually I love them. Every person I meet, I sort of like, and I'm not trying to be corny here, but I see the universe in them. You can see a part of everything and everyone, and it's wonderful to look in their eyes. But when they start to group, when they get into clots, when there's, for instance, groups even as small as 2.
I think I'm addicted to
Here's a good example.
painkillers.
Yeah, not as good as you can.
This is like aspirin.
What happens is they begin to surrender.
Sometimes you get sick and then you get too addicted.
Even like a guy, you know how if there's a bunch of guys hang around.
I once
together in
even
high
got
school or college,
addicted
and one of them
to
gets married.
nasal spray. I had to
He's in a group, and the wife
spray
would say, well, you know,
into my nose.
wonderful with the kids at
Otherwise
home,
I couldn't
with
breathe.
Those morons at the bar. He's different.
Now I'm
And the
addicted
guys
to
would
this.
say, hey, you were such a good guy, but
Or I
when
get
you
a headache.
man, the guys, you know.
It's not too bad though.
People change.
I'm really trying
As the group
to
gets bigger, 6, 8, 12, 15, 100,
resist the
15,000,
temptation
they
to
begin
just
have
take all this
farm
and die.
bands, little slogans, lists of people they don't
Maybe.
like, and it gets out of hand. So I'm in favor
I'll
of
be
people
fine.
one by one.
I am
but
taking
large
the
groups, I
painkiller,
would like
though.
to see them disappear.
So
Like
that's where you want the
juice.
comet all net through the ozone
We
layer.
have to get back to the ferrets. The only hope.
Carbonated water
Very,
plus
very nice.
It gives me something to hope for,
scrap.
and it keeps me separate from the rest of the
It's
book.
like,
There's
I
no
think you're
one,
really trying to party.
yeah, well, there's no one to talk to about this.
you know, we
I
call
really
it
think
soda,
so.
but it's
But
not. It's like
keeps me going.
All right.
some kind of
we
a
really sincerely
mixture.
hope you come back sometime.
sweet
I mean, I
stuff
do
that you
I'd
mix
like
with
to
water.
make no reason to plug in.
Yeah, you don't
Makes
have to
like
plug anything next time. Of course, the HBO
fizzy
special,
beverage.
which you're plugging.
Right.
George Carlin.
Live on the 30th.
Okay,
I
George
go and
Carlin
get some
back
food
in town
and
debuts March 30th at
maybe I
10
make a
o'clock
video.
PM on HBO. It'll be hysterical,
Yeah.
no doubt about it.
Show.
So this
Really?
is an antipsychotic. It's basically for bipolar as far as I can tell. I'm taking one, sometimes 2. It helps to sleep. It helps anxiety as well.
Always trying to be
This is essentially for OCD, but it also covers anxiety and depression and some other stuff. I'm taking these right now.
down to the grave.
This is Prozac, I'm
No
pretty
matter
sure.
how much you know,
Yep.
no matter how much you feel.
This is essentially for depression.
burnt.
This is
To the
Xanax
last minute you
for
breathe. You
anxiety.
open a cap on a mustard
This
jar,
is
it's
essentially
burnt.
for
You open up a can of cat.
bipolar.
it's burnt.
I'm not
Everything
taking
is
these
burning.
right now.
All you're trying to do
I'm only
is
taking these because it
walk
seems to cover all the ground.
drink a glass of water.
And this is like aspirin. I get sick a lot. I get the shits. I have a headache. I'm forced to take this right now, otherwise I get a headache. I'm taking another Xanax just because I don't give a fuck about myself anymore.
Oh, it marks in my mouth. Fuck. Fuck myself.
I just took 2 Xanax, I should what I was supposed to. Let's see what happens. I really need to take a piss.
food. I got this. And then I also just got a bunch of other stuff. I just got brown rice with meat. Then we got meat with cheese and rice. Pretty good. Yeah, this is like rice and cream and jam. Very good. Alright, so I ate with no knives or forks or anything like that. I just used my hand. I ate quite disgusting. So, you know, my hands are all fucking gooey because of the sweet, because of the fucking, you know, the cake I was eating or whatever it's called. Anyway, I also got 3 Pepsi Diet Coke. I'm drinking one of them. And then, yeah, I think I'm gonna go down to the riverbed. Try to produce something of value. Documenting reality. Told you, fucking sticky.
You know, I've been thinking about, you know, what kind of video to make, what kind of topic to broach, and I just thought, why not do a little bit of like, you know, just little philosophical thoughts that sort of pop into your head that are not, you know, serious per se, but like silly shit or weird shit that pops into many people's heads. And I thought one thing I've been thinking about is, you know, I was looking at pictures and videos of like cute girls from Chainsaw Man or somebody from YouTube, and you know, as a straight guy, it comes into your head like, oh, I would like to tap that. She's really cute, she's really hot. You know what I mean? And then it dawned on me like, you know, if I was that girl, I wouldn't need myself like that. You know, like if I was actually the girl that guys pine after, you know, all the fun would be beaten out of it. So the object that you see in them, you know, that's only for you. If you could get as close to what you want as possible, which is to be what you want, you no longer want it. And that just goes back to the old paradox that you can't have what you want, because the moment you have it, you no longer have it. You know? So that's one thing that came into my head. Again, I'm trying to be really honest. I'm trying to make a video where I'm like, I tell you about really honest little thoughts that I've had, that most people have had, because I've always thought it really fascinating that most people at some point believe or think the same thing. You know what I mean? Like George Carlin had a bit about this where he was like, hey, well, let's talk about not our differences but our similarities. You know, and he was like, do you know when the situation when you're going down a flight of stairs and you take 2 steps, like, you know, 2 stairs down accidentally, 2 steps down, and then you're like, you know, all of these thoughts that most of us have had. But many of these thoughts you're not actually allowed to say because they, you know, contain something nasty or disgusting. And, you know, I've always had a kind of obsession with, you know, breaking the rules and teasing out exactly what people want to hide, you know. So, I'm just saying, when you listen to me say fucked up shit, look at that nigga, you know, or show myself doing fucked up shit, you know, you watch me do fucked up shit, I'm just trying to give you a picture of what actual reality actually is on this planet. And I just think we lack that. We just lack, you know, the true honesty of what actually goes on. Everybody is always virtue signaling and putting on an act, you know. Like, I think most people pick their nose. I love picking my nose, it's really fun. But you're not allowed to admit that you do it. You know, when you scratch your ass, you hide. You always make sure nobody's watching when you scratch your ass, and yet you do that. You don't admit when, you know, you wanna, you know, tap a girl because they don't wanna look like a creep, even though you do want to. And, you know, I'm just saying, I just find there's something dark lurking in the background that people don't want to tease out. And it's so mysterious and you know, ill thought about, ill spoken about, you know, that I don't even know how to express in words what I want to tell you. But I think you all fundamentally know what I'm talking about, that there's a deep and mandatory repression of honesty, and we always live a lie. Like, for example, why do we have laws? Well, we have laws in order to pretend that reality is not what it is, that, you know, we do have an intuition to be violent or to steal, to be as selfish as possible, and imposing laws against those things it's just a dishonest way, it's a roundabout way of admitting our crimes, you know, that we do have the desire to do all those criminal things, and precisely by making those things illegal, we admit that we suck. We admit that, you know, if it was legal, if you could get away with it, you would probably do it.
It's a story that's deeply unsettled millions, you know, in China. Footage of a 2-year-old girl hit by a van and left bleeding in the street by passers-by. Footage too graphic
maybe some fear sometimes.
The entire
but, you know,
accident is caught on camera. The driver pauses after hitting the child. His back wheels seem resting on her for over a second.
About ourselves.
Within 2 minutes, 3 people passed 2-year-old Wang Yu by.
If you could get away with it, you would do it.
Injured toddler completely.
And that's just so disturbing. And
before moving off.
You know, again, I don't even know how to put it into words. Like,
there were other people who
sort
walked
of understand what I'm getting at.
And a second
But
van
you're also
ran over
sort
her
of
leg
shaking your head and maybe thinking like,
raised the alarm.
oh, this guy's nuts. What the hell
he
is
was
he
rushed
talking
to hospital,
about?
but it was too late.
But you sort of know what I'm talking about. That
I wonder how many of you,
almost everything you do is a
looking
lie.
at that,
We
said to yourself just now, I would not have done that.
Smile.
I would have
pretend
stopped to
to
help. Raise your hands
be
if that's
polite.
thought
We
you could.
pretend to not,
As I thought, that's most
you know,
of you.
rape people
And I
or
believe
kill
you, I'm
them
sure you're right. But
or
before
punch
you give
them in the
yourself
face,
too much credit,
cheat them out of their
look at
money.
this.
We pretend we're not
UNICEF
creeps.
report that
We
in
pretend we're not
2011,
criminals.
6.9
But
million
you all
children
basically
under
know it's a
5
lie.
died from
That,
preventable
If
poverty-related
you could get away with
diseases.
it, you would probably
UNICEF
do
thinks that that's good
everything.
news because
Almost
the
everything.
figure has been steadily coming down
And that just goes
from
to
12 million
expose
in 1990.
how bad we
That is
actually
good.
are.
But still,
And,
6.9 million
You
is
know,
19,000
you could
children
make an
dying
excuse and say,
every day.
you're just projecting. But I really don't think I am. I think I'm actually one of the better people. I have a lot of guilt, right? I feel a lot of guilt and responsibility. So I'm probably one of the better ones, and I'm pretty self-aware. And yet I still know that deep down I'm a monster. That if I could get away with not paying taxes, I would probably do it, because hey, you know, I need to eat and my parents need to eat, so fuck everybody else. There's always a justification that you make up, you know. I did something bad, but I was a kid. I did something bad, but you know, I had a mental illness. And these are all excuses of a kind, because what you do is still real nonetheless. No, you know, there really is no such thing as an excuse. I've said before, there's only such a thing as an explanation, because there's a cause to every effect. There's an explanation to every effect. We then impose a picture on top of that. We impose a schema on top of that, and we say, well, he's guilty and he's not guilty, and he meant it and he didn't mean it, and you know, and it's all just bullshit, you know. That the only facts are hidden underneath that schema of what we think is right and what we think is wrong, and how, you know, the scale that we impose on the right and the wrong. And it's all just a bunch of bullshit, a bunch of man-made bullshit. So, you know, I don't know if that made any sense to you, but I just sense that there's dishonesty everywhere you look. And it has always disturbed me, the dishonesty that befalls everything. That nothing I don't do it honestly. I don't do it because it's beautiful or because you know, God said it was a good idea. You know, I do it because I'm selfish and because I want to, or because somebody put it into my head that it's a good idea. It's not divine, it's not perfect, it's not honest, it's just a pile of shit. It's just a bunch of external stimuli. It's just a bunch of desire that you masquerade, that you explain away with fucking laws and, but it's legal, you know. It's legal, it's tradition. It's okay, we all make mistakes, you know. All these fucking schemas, which only work to expose our insufficiency. But I'll see if I can make it, if I can make this mean something else, you know, try to explain it in some better way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you know, we have this idea that, you know, we dress up in clothes, we walk on 2 feet, we learn a language, we go to school, learn a trade, we do all these little things, and we think we're not monsters anymore. And it's really strange, because some of the biggest monstrosities, you could say some of the worst monstrosities, were created by human beings. After all this technology and advancement had been introduced. And, we like to flatter ourselves. We like to pat ourselves on the back and tell ourselves that, but we're good guys. We are separate from nature. We're better than nature. And yet, there's a sense in which we're even worse, because we try to cloak our monstrosity, shove it under the rug and pretend it isn't there. But that sham can only be withheld for so long. Once the wars come out in Ukraine or in Palestine or anywhere else, once the consequences are removed, all you have to do is go to a playground or the schoolyard, and see what we're really like, and then we pretend that we get civilized in the end, but the cruelty is always there. I don't believe there's a single human on the planet who hasn't had a job, who hasn't gone to school, hasn't dealt with authority, who doesn't know what I'm talking about when I say the shit gets out. No matter how much you try to shove it under the rug, the moment somebody gets some power over you, they will enjoy that power, and they will many a time exploit that power. And that's the real face of human beings. We're not good people. We tell ourselves that we're sophisticated, but it's a joke. We ain't sophisticated. We just pretend that we are. Pretend that because we can use language that we're somehow better than everybody else. You could see it as a big sham. Anyway, I had some notes, some thoughts that I wanted to elucidate, that one of the biggest fundamental problems that I have is that you want to feed the shit sandwich to people that are not you, right? And all of us are complicit. It's not just the natalists who are complicit. We're all complicit. We don't know what it's like to be flogged, to get lashed 50 times as punishment. We don't really understand the experience of people on this planet, of what other people had to endure that are worse than what we have to endure. We pretend that we know and we understand, but you get yourself out of harm's way as much as you possibly can. And that way you show no solidarity to other people and their pain and their suffering. You have not you have not been lashed or shot in the head or raped. Most of you. And every day you live the lie that the world is just what you experience, and you never take into account, you never feel on your skin what other people experience. You could help them, but you choose not to, because it's not you. What the fuck does it matter? It's not me. So you live in this lie, this constant lie that what you live, and just because you intellectualize it and you subjugate life, you molest life to, you subjugate it to concepts, and you molest it, and now you think you have it down, you have it under control, and now you understand what life is, just because you made up a cute word and describe the word, Well, rape is when somebody pins you down and forcibly inserts their dick into you or their extremities into you, or coax you in some other way, and that's rape. And you've nicely gutted what being raped actually is by imposing a bunch of words that are essentially placeholders for the real thing. And now you think you're empathetic. Now you think you have taken full account of what it must be like to be human, of what the human experience is, just because you put it in words. And you tell other people, oh, I'm a good guy. I don't support rape or any of that stuff, but when you get horny and you jerk off, you think about all kinds of fucked up scenarios. You imagine, grabbing your ex or whatever and just fucking her. You're a liar. I mean, you just pretend that you're a good person. You just pretend that you're against racism. Like, let's say you think you're an anti-racist, and then you said the N-word about 14 times, about 1,400 times in your head already. And you think that just because you can use words to defend yourself, then you're not racist anymore, right? Even though you basically are. But because you can hide your real self, your deeper self, let's say, from everybody else, and you can whip out the nice words.
The reason you think he was spared?
The smiles or whatever. Then you're a good guy.
That God loves our country and he thinks we're going to bring our country
back. But it seems to me that everybody's an asshole. Everybody sucks. Everybody's a terrible person.
The horrible things that are happening.
Because they're all complicit.
It can be solved. It can be solved.
They're all complicit in the game. Just by living and breathing, you're complicit in the game.
And how can you say it's luck when it's, 20 million?
Like you might have contributed a lot to society, but
I was in that position. It's the only position where that bullet could have missed.
And you believe in
you're
that?
not taking
I do.
full account of what you're responsible for.
I believe so.
You talk about the country. You believe you have more to do. You weren't done. You were spared for
expenditure.
a reason.
Well, God believes that.
The window of opportunity that you you spend on one thing and you think that helps, and you're not taking into account that all that time could have been spent doing something more useful. What's the word? There's a term for that. Opportunity cost, You think you've done your duty, but you really haven't, This is what I've been thinking about. Is that in some sense everybody's an asshole. Everybody who stands by and watches bullying happen. When I was a kid, I got bullied and I saw bullying happen, and all the kids who were not bullied or not bullied as bad, they ended up being these normal people, right? I met some of them when I was older. They are decent. Maybe they become decent people, but they're not taking into account. They're not accounting for the fact of letting bullying happen when they were young, right? And those are, you don't pile up those tokens. You don't stack up and tally those tokens. So this point I made before, that let's say you get a job and it pays you 6 figures. You don't get a deduction for all the terrible things that you've done in your life, because you're producing the value that the market imputes to your work, and so if you produce X amount of value, that's what you get in return, for minus the capitalist fee. But you don't get a deduction for it. Oh, but I see that you used to bully kids and you stood by and you just watched it happen, and we're gonna that's a 25% deduction, right? That's and the incarceration system doesn't account for all that stuff. The incarceration system is always partially blind. It doesn't have a full understanding of what a person is. It cannot. It just doesn't have all the relevant facts. And the market doesn't give a fuck. Now, other people, frankly, either don't give a fuck or they don't know. So it's always bothered me that the lives that we're living are lies that are based on incomplete data, incomplete information, hypocrisy. Like how dare you even continue to live without getting 50 lashes like other people have had to. And you live your life as if the experience of getting 50 lashes is not part of the world. You know what I mean? You just got the world. You got it with all its significance and you fill it in with your own bullshit. And you think you've done a good job because you picked out the right words to describe it. But those are all just placeholders. They're arguments in a function, but what you fill it in with is always contingent to you and arbitrary to you. You can never write a function that's objective. There's no objective function. It would have to contain everything at one point, but it can't, right? When you write code, you have to tell the computer, I want I want the birth date of this person. I want this year and that year, as a variable. But you can't write the code in a way that's complete and perfect and that accounts for all the variables. You know what I mean? It's like how there's an infinite number of numbers, of natural numbers, like positive integers, and negative ones. You can just keep going, and you'll never have a complete proof that, you can never have a complete proof that, Goldbach's conjecture is correct, for example, which sounds like a fancy word, but fancy term, but all it means is that if you add two prime numbers, like 3 and 5, it will give you an even number, 8. Right? And prime numbers are ones that you can't divide by 2 and get 0 in the end. So they're like 3, 5, 7, not 9, because 9 can be divided by I don't know. It's like if you divide 9 by 3, I don't think that's a prime number, because the end result doesn't have I don't remember the term. But if you divide 9 by 3, then you don't carry over 1 or 2. Nothing remains. But if you divide 7 by 2, there's 1 that remains. 7 by 3, there's 1 that remains. And so that's what a prime number is. Prime number is that you cannot divide it by a smaller number larger than 1, I think. And there's no residue. There's a mathematical term for that, but I don't remember right now. Anyway, I always forget these things at the worst possible times. Anyway, the point is that everywhere you look, you don't get a full picture of what the world is, and so you live your life in a kind of delusion, right? I've been reading about these, biologists who are like, the human beings are. It's not like we are, we are the most objective creatures in the sense that we have access to the most objective knowledge. I mean, there are animals who can echolocate, like dolphins. Whales who can hear decibels that would puncture our eardrums. Bats who can, see, who can perceive something, I don't know, hundreds of miles away or something that we could never do, right? Or walk in a perfectly straight line like an ant or something. We just don't have, the kind of perfect knowledge that we think we do. What we do is we try to shirk the empirical world, and we use deduction, right? We say, okay, we might not have a perceptual picture of the world that's complete. We might not be able to have a sharper vision or better hearing like other animals do. We might not be able to fly and see the world from the sky, like a bird would do. We don't have fins, and we might not have those advanced techniques. But we can use reason, we can use deduction. All it boils down to is deduction, that we just make certain axiomatic assumptions, and then we use deduction to get to what we call an objective fact that all the other animals are too dumb to see. Right, so we come up with words, we come up with concepts, then we use deduction. And we say, well, 2 + 2 is 4, and we're the only animals who know that. Gravitational pull is real, and we're the only ones who know that. And it's testable, you can drop a ball and another ball which is not as heavy as the other ball, and you will see that they move at the same velocity. And it's like, but we all need deductive powers to do this. We all need to make certain assumptions about what an object is and where the object ends and where the object begins. And we have to assume that our concepts are legible and that they produce objective laws. And yet it's so obvious that and these are just concepts that are made up by our creative mind. And we somehow take cognitive attitude, and we somehow think the cognitive attitude equals objective knowledge. And it's like, it's not objective knowledge, it's just our knowledge. It's conceptual knowledge, it's deductive knowledge. But we mistake that for the one objective way of looking at the world. And that's our intellectual gambit, that's our intellectual trick. And it's no better than the geocentric view of the universe or gods or any of that stuff. But science and philosophy and politics, social science and literature, they're just other ways of anthropocentric masturbation. We hyper-focus on ourselves, filter the world through our own perception and our own concepts, and then we pretend that's the way it is. That's the way it is. And there's nothing more destructive in the world than the idea of that's the way it is. I don't think I did a good job of explaining all that. But, yeah, let's see if I can do better. I don't know. So there's this paradox called the liar's paradox. So suppose I'm a liar and I'm a trickster, and I say, what I'm saying right now is false. Now, if I'm a liar, then that statement is actually true. What I'm saying right now is false, because I'm a liar. So what I'm saying right now is actually true, because it's not false, because I'm lying. But then the statement becomes true. And so is the liar a liar then, or is he not a liar? This goes back to these old paradoxes of, can God, lift a rock so heavy that he can't lift it, Can he create a rock that's so heavy that he can't lift it? If he can't create a rock that's so heavy he can't lift it, then he's not omnipotent. But if he can, if he can create a rock so hard, so difficult, so heavy he can't lift it, then there's something he can't do. Then he's not omnipotent. So in any case, there is something God cannot do. Anyway, I'm pretty bad at explaining these things, but the point is that there are all these paradoxes that arise, and the question is, is there a way to solve them? And usually the way philosophers solve them is by creating a meta language. So they say, okay, this cannot be justified in the base language, so create a meta language. And in the meta language we'll be able to eliminate the paradox. So, like there's this paradox of the sets. Can you create a set of empty sets where the set doesn't contain itself, right? It's a set of empty sets. It's a set of all empty sets. Now, does that set then contain itself? Because if it contains itself, then it's not an empty set. And if it doesn't contain itself, then you cannot account for all the empty sets. And anyway, so the point is that the way philosophers will approach these things is by creating a meta system that where they can say, this paradox doesn't concern us. So on the higher level language, we can say that statement itself can be bracketed, and that statement itself is doesn't find itself on the meta language. So we can say that the whole statement itself is just irrelevant on the meta language. And so there's always a way for the philosopher to escape the paradox by just inventing another structure that can deal with it, right? So if I make a language above the basic language, then I can say the liar paradox is not there. Because I can say, this language, this meta language has nothing to do with the base language, or it contains the base language. And so I can say that, well, that's just a paradox on the lower level language, but it doesn't concern me. Because on this language, I can just put a negation symbol before the paradox and say that has nothing to do with me. But that just creates like an infinite regress where, you're creating meta languages and meta languages, and you can just impose the same paradox, right? So if I stack two stones on top of each other and I say, well, I need another stone in order to contain these two stones, then I put down the third stone, and then I say, well, I need another stone to contain these three, to contain these three stones, to give them some foundation. So I make a fourth one, I put the fourth one down, and then that holds up the three other ones, and it's like, there's something wrong with the foundations of language, of natural language, and so philosophers try to explain that away by using logic. And so they try to eliminate these vague concepts, ill-defined concepts. What does it mean to be free? Is there a God? The Socrates paradox. If I make a heap of 30 stones or pebbles, when does it become a heap? Does it become a heap at 5 or 10 or 20 or 40? I just eliminate all these conceptual problems by making language as precise as possible. And I say, for all X, for some X, I make all these rigid rules on what can be said using, logic, formal logic. And I say, there's no place for something like free will or a Socrates paradox, because it just cannot be said in the logical language. In the logical language, you can only say things like, all bachelors are unmarried, all stones are heavy, and so I don't pay attention to these things like what is right and what is wrong and what is free and what is unfree. They just have no place in the system because they're badly defined. If you can quantify it, if you can translate it into a simple statement, a proposition, like there's a pebble over there, so I can say there are some pebbles in the world, and then I can say pebbles, if there's a pebble, that means it's made up of something else. And I try to be as if there's a pebble, then there's also a stone somewhere, where the pebble came from. And so I can make these little logical connections of P and Q and so on. If P, then Q. And that's how they are supposed to solve the problems. But the problem is that you're not really solving the problem. You're just eliminating the problems that that language imposes on you. And in the end, you don't really say much of anything. If you reduce everything to these little simple symbols, then you beat the life out of the life. You got life. And you turn life into these little predicates. And now you think you've fixed some kind of problem. And it's like, well, you never really fixed anything. You just taken up this cognitive attitude where you think, I can figure out what the remainder is and all that kind of stuff, but you haven't solved any problem. You haven't actually accounted for the experience of life, the fullness of life. You just don't know anything. Nobody understands shit. You can describe the mechanics, you can do logic. I'm not saying you can't, but you will always be missing the full experience. That if I look at a tree, then my experience of the tree is just as much part of reality as the formal properties of the tree. And they think they can just gut the feeling out of it and say, well, the tree somehow exists without me. Not as long as I'm here. As long as I'm here, it's part of my experience, and my experience is part of the world. And you cannot quantify that away. You cannot build sophisticated theories about what the world is independent of the experience. You just can't really do that. Or if you do, you'll just end up with a half picture of reality. But the fundamental problem is that there's a difference between the formal and the informal, the form and the content. And once the content gets into the form, it messes it up. And there's no longer a clear way of adjudicating what is correct and what is not correct, because everyone has their own perceptions. Like one of my favorite examples of this is the Potemkin village, which is like a fake, it's a political sham, it's a political ruse, where they build like a village that looks real. For example, there's one in North Korea. But the whole point, and it's meant to give the impression that, North Korea is rich. So, in the demilitarized zone, they built one. So if you look at it, it looks like, oh, now North Korea is actually richer than it is, And so the interesting thing about that thing is that the village on the level of the form is totally real. It's a real village. It's made up of buildings, it's made up of bricks, it's made up of whatever else, windows and so on and so forth, and the adhesives and whatever else. And yet nobody lives there. It's a ghost town. It's not real. And so here we have a situation where something is both real and not real at the same time. What you might call a real contradiction in the world. And because there's just no way of saying it's a fake village. Well, it's fake, but it's also real. So in terms of the formal properties, it's real. In terms of the informal properties, it's not real, because the informal properties, I mean, like, it's political substance in terms of its, in terms of the whether people live there, in terms of, do people pay taxes, because in terms of those things, it's not real. Nobody lives there, nobody pays taxes. It's not a real village in terms of the socio-political substance of it. At the same time, the village is real because it's made up of these formal properties like walls and buildings and so on. So it's real, but in terms of its political function, nobody lives there. Nobody does anything there. It's fake, it's not real. And the whole point is that it's supposed to be fake, and yet it's real on the formal level. So there's a kind of difference between the formal parts and the informal parts. And that's why I think philosophers like Heraclitus or Hegel or Parmenides are important, because they point out, or Gödel, they point out that things are not that simple, that there are real problems, that there is an incompleteness to the world. There's something fishy going on here. The only way something can be what it is by also not being what it is. Right? The example from Lao Tzu, Chinese philosophy, that the only way a pot is a pot, like a clay pot or something, is by having empty space inside of it. So the pot is only a pot because it's a pot, but also because it's not a pot, because there's empty space inside of it, and then the space and everything else around it. If you couldn't differentiate the space from around it, it couldn't be what it is. You never step into the same river twice. Which is to say that it is the same river in some sense, but the substance of what you actually step into has changed. The river has shifted position. They are now different molecules, different stuff than what used to be there, and yet we somehow still recognize the river as the same river. And there's something fishy going on. There's something the old classical laws of logic don't seem to apply. That either something is or it isn't true. That either a proposition or its negation has to be true. So you have the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, and then some other one. So either P or not P. I don't remember the third law, of course, but anyway, the point is that they're impossible to maintain. Like, another problem is the problem between validity and soundness in propositional logic. That, there's no way to figure out what is sound and what is not sound, except by what we perceive as sound and not sound. So, a Nazi could easily make a valid deduction, because if the conclusion follows from the premises, It's a valid deduction, but is it a sound proposition? Is it a sound argument? Are the propositions true? Well, that will really just depend on who decides on what is true and what is not true. If you say the Jews are shysters and therefore we should execute them, the proposition is so vague and so subjective that to them it might be sound, but to us it is not sound. There's simply no way of objectively deciding what is sound or what is true, because our perception is subjectivizes everything and relativizes everything, and it's the same problem with probability. I think this is even recognized in Bayesian probability. That how do you define your priors? How do you define what is an event and what is not an event? These are all problems. These are problems for those who believe in some kind of objectivity. And even linear causation, you can say, is insufficient to describe the world. Like, for example, let's say that you're playing pool and you want to explain the causation of the balls. You have the cue ball and then you have the color balls. And you put the color balls in the triangle, and you get your cue and you hit the cue ball, and it breaks up the color balls. Now it's one thing to ask, how did the color balls get disrupted? And you just say, well, because the cue balls caused them to be disrupted. The cue ball was there, and then the cue ball was hit, and then it disrupted the other balls. But I feel like that's just kind of arbitrarily primatizes the direction of causation. Like, how do you, like, it's one thing to say, okay, the cue ball disrupted them, but why did the color balls end up, why did the color balls let themselves be disrupted in the first place? Like, why did the color balls say it's a good idea to get disrupted? And you can't answer the second question by answering the first. You can't say, well, the color balls let themselves be disrupted because the cue ball was there. There is some sense in which the color balls already had to be there before the causation could even take place, before the linear causation could even take place. They somehow anticipated their future. They somehow said, we have to, we're going to decide to be put in this triangle and let ourselves be disrupted. But you can just easily look at it from this other perspective of how did the color balls get there? Like, why prioritize the linear causation in terms of how the white ball disrupted the color balls, and not how the color balls let themselves be disrupted in the first place. So there's something fishy. Like Slavoj Žižek would give the example of, like, Shakespeare, that Shakespeare was not done being what he is in the 1600s when he died. Shakespeare was retroactively reconstituted as Shakespeare over the centuries. We now read a different Shakespeare because we have more context the plays are modernized of Shakespeare. And so it's not enough to ask, how did Shakespeare come to be? Oh, okay, he was born in England. He was the bard, you know. You also have to ask, what's up from the other direction? And how did it come to be that the world organized itself in such a way to make space for Shakespeare to change the future, right? How did everything come together and say, okay, we welcome Shakespeare's effects, us being the future, you know? So there's something fishy going on in terms of linear causation. That the simplistic ideas of linear causation, contradiction. There's no such thing as a contradiction. Causation is linear. Then we have things like everything is made up of genes, genetic determinism. That's being picked apart because, like, for example, I made the argument that it's not just me who says this. I mean, there are biologists and philosophers who say similar things. But, there are philosophers now who would say, or biologists who would say that, this old Darwinian picture that everything is bottom up and not, and, that we are just kind of meat puppets and blah, blah, blah is the molecule. That it's not true, that the organism, although it might be determined in some way by the genes, does reflexively and retroactively act on its own life. And I given examples of that in previous videos, like, here's one way to prove that you can just look at the micro to determine the macro. So if you're in a forest and you have a tree, of course the tree is made up of genetic stuff and molecular stuff, all kinds of molecules in there, atoms in there, genes in there that make up a tree. I don't really know about the details, but it's basically, there's woody growth, it extends outward and makes more wood. And then, anyway, the point is that there's nothing inside of a tree that says I'm gonna get cut down. There is no genes or collection of genes or molecules or collections of molecules that say, all right, we're going to get cut down. We're going to make this tree get cut down, right? There's no cut down gene. And yet we know that many trees are cut down. The lumberjack comes with his fucking axe and cuts them down. And here's the freaky part. There's nothing in the lumberjack or his axe which says, I'm gonna cut down trees. There's no molecules or genes that say, I am going to cut. The lumberjack became a lumberjack in some other way. He didn't have the lumberjack gene. He became a lumberjack via his relationship with the environment. And notice that in order for lumberjack and his axe to make contact with the wood, again, you cannot just look at each of the genes and molecules and find that process, right? In order for them to make contact, they have to make contact in this thing that we call the environment. The world is not just a collection of genes or collection of molecules. There's the emergent property, or what philosophers call emergent property of the environment. And it's somehow retroactively, sometimes they say downward causation, I would say retroactively, the organism responds to its environment and changes its very potential. Like, the potential is somehow there to be cut. There's Aristotle would say there's a potential in everything to be what it is. That, there's a potential in you to be cut. There's a potential in you to be a lumberjack. If you're a tree or a lumberjack. There's a potential in you to cut if you're an axe. And anyway, that potential can only be realized through the environment. And so it's not enough to just look at the micro. You have to look at the macro and observe how the macro, in some mysterious way, changes his very destiny. The organism that functions in the macro, which is the environment, somehow reconstitutes his very essence, his very life, even though he's made up of microorganisms. He's made up of not organisms, but micro stuff, made up of cells and atoms and so on and so forth. But somehow that's not enough to explain the world. You do need to look at the environment. And I think the relationship there is retroactive. That one example I gave is autism. It might be that autism is, if you want to use the words, clinically, objectively correct and true, like autism is a real thing in some sense. But, if autism is basically just a collection of traits that you have, the way the autism manifests itself in the world, and that's basically what it is. It's just autism is like, okay, you like systems, you're shy, you're socially awkward, you pace around in your room, you avoid eye contact. If that's basically what autism is. It's a confluence of those things. But notice that all of that stuff is essentially socially conditioned, right? The way you're treated in society and the way you manifest yourself in the world, in society, in the environment, whatever. It's wholly conditioned on the environment, what kind of autistic traits you manifest and to what degree you manifest them. Right? Like, I used to pace around in my room a lot more. But now that I'm on all kinds of meds, they have helped me a little bit to get out of my depression and try to, spend my time on something more useful than pacing around my fucking room. And, if I hadn't been bullied in school, maybe I wouldn't avoid eye contact nearly as much as I do. And I wouldn't be silent and mute nearly as much as I am and used to be, even more so. I would not be so adamant on schedules, on systems. I would not be so socially anxious, if I had been treated correctly, right? So the environment, the way you're treated in the world and the way you manifest yourself in the world has a retroactive effect on how your condition is manifested in the world, on how your condition is extrapolated in the world. And so it's not enough to say, okay, he's autistic, so it is what it is. No, it's the way the autism manifests changes everything about the autism. And we can still maintain the word and say, okay, I'm still autistic, if you insist. Because I also don't like this postmodernist bullshit of, it's just words and society made up the words. No, I mean, obviously, if you get autism, you will feel it. If you get cancer, you will feel it. These are not just social creations somehow. That's another mistake. So, people want to destroy these dualisms like gene environment dualism, mind brain dualism, whatever, mental illness, no mental illness dualism. See, I like these dualisms. Like, we do need these dualisms. What we need to do is flatten them. Like, what we need to do is not like get rid of them, but to sort of understand the relationship between the dualism, the parts of the dualism. Not to pretend the dualism isn't there, like there's no difference between micro and macro, genes and environment, mental illness and no mental illness. Just like you wouldn't pretend there are no classes, like capital class, like, in terms of Marxism, like, the inheritance class, capitalist, proletariat, So don't get rid of all these others. Just try to understand the relationship between the parts of the system as more flat and democratic. Like, one imposes on the other imposes in the one. It's not, the way we conceptualize these things in space and time geometrically already fucks us up, right? Like, we used to think the micro determines the macro, and that's all that it is, and there's no relationship in the other direction. I mean, like a tree flows up, like in trees, they send up the water, and then they send down the nutrition. Like the relationship doesn't just go from the dirt to the sky. It also comes from the sky to the dirt. There's a process, a reflexive process in everything. We are in a web of things, and they're all connected to each other in some way, and the relationship is reflexive. And so we should not pretend that these dualisms don't exist. We should just reconceptualize the geometric the space in which they exist. That causation is not simply linear, it's retroactive. That the micro and the macro, the genes and the environment, the molecules and the environment, it's not just bottom to top, it's also top to bottom. The way we conceptualize things in space has given us a lot of excuses. We try to run away from paradoxes that language imposes by creating meta-languages, and just pretend it's not that, it's not a problem, like somehow contradiction and paradox are not part and parcel of the world. But of course, if we listen to somebody like Hegel and Heraclitus, they are part and parcel of the world. That's the fundamental point of pessimism. Like, pessimists are committed to a kind of admission of paradox and contradiction that you want that if you get what you want, you no longer want it, so you never really wanted it in the first place. What you want is the need and not the procurement of the thing itself. And that's the fundamental pessimistic lesson. So again, it depends on how stringent you want to be about how you define things, but I think we do lose something if we lose the concept of paradox and contradiction, that the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, or that was the third logic. There's the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, the law of the excluded middle. But none of these logics really work. Your classical logic sucks, and then they introduced, this predicate logic and all that kind of stuff. But that's even worse. Because, you just create all these placeholders in order, to pretend that you have captured reality at its purest. That if you have, it's necessary that, it's possible that, it's all some, probability logic, it doesn't really help. All these conceptual tools that we've come up with, probability logic, biology, physics, we just make a mess of everything, and we pretend that we have objective knowledge because we can use these pretty little symbols. It's just a mess. It's just I just don't know why people think everything is about truth. You cannot say anything about the world in general. If you say something about the world in general, it's just useless. That's another paradox that the more precise you want to get, which should be the point of philosophy or science, the more precise you want to get, the more precision you lose, the more objectivity you lose. So precision and objectivity have an inverse relationship. That, for example, if I say the most general statement, like the world exists, I'm willing to accept that as a proposition, that the world does exist. But it says nothing. It's a very trivial statement to say. And then if I start, trying to be more precise and, kind of zoom in and punch in and get specific, like describe everything about yourself. It's too hard. I can't. Right? So I've taken the precision and I've traded the precision for certainty and objectivity, but the objectivity becomes empty. It becomes like a carcass, a framework. It's only the framework of a house, but when you fill the house, it becomes subjective. Like, that's why I've made up this quip that if we enter into the same room, it's not the same room. That if you have a certain history with the room, like you got beaten in the room and I haven't. To you it's a torture chamber, but to me, it's just a room.
22 Longwood Avenue.
And so we can take the formal measurements of the room and say, yes, it has a jar, a nightstand, a bed, a king-size bed, whatever else, a window. And that's going to be, objective, and it's going to be descriptive, but it's so empty.
And I had to get all
it's not precise. It's just a bunch of vague stuff about objects, but the precision of what the room actually means to the person that was abused in the room is all lost. And once you introduce that, it's going to be very private to that person, and so you can't say much objective about that.
Okay.
And his memories could be all messed up, and his perception could be all messed up, or it's just different. The perceptions are different, right? Like, some people are deaf, some people are blind, some are autistic, some are tall, some are short. There's no way we see the world the same way. And just learn about animals. Animals are very different creatures. They see the world in a completely different way. And this idea that we have some kind of solution to what the world actually is, just because we're human and we have language and concepts and logic and mathematics, is just absurd. It tells you nothing. It's just a conceptual tool.
Of course, you can't help screaming.
You know?
6 years old, 7 years old.
Like if I say something like, okay, planets are real, the solar system is real. Fine, but it tells you nothing.
I didn't scream at all.
It doesn't
Didn't make a sound.
it's knowledge that's very pointless knowledge. It's knowledge that's gutted of any kind of substance. What matters is how we walk through life.
I don't know. It's just a terrible place to stand and talk about it.
Our perception of what the world is very narrow. Right? And I think most physics doesn't have.
Let's forget it.
They just have mathematical descriptions of what the world is. I don't have much of a. They don't have much evidence. It's at a certain point it just becomes abstract mathematics, and it doesn't mean anything to us unless we can see it and experience it. And even when we do, we only experience it through our own way. So I just think with this project that we're gonna know everything somehow, or even most things, or that we know something really and objectively, it just stinks of bullshit to me. One more. I mean, I just returned to this example by Dazai that really set me off this road of, in his novel No Longer Human, where he was talking about how, he was, that, that there really is no way to waste tons and tons of rice, because there's no way to go to everybody's house and collect the rice. Like, the only way that humanity wastes food is collectively, but the collective in some sense doesn't exist, because you cannot collect all the waste from everybody and put it together, right? So we imagine this giant pile of waste, but this giant pile in some sense doesn't exist, because we're all creatures unto ourselves, and it's not possible to put all this together. So it's, in a way, it's an abstraction, right? That was one example that he gave. That it's perfectly possible for somebody to catch their feet, between the train station and the train, or fall into the toilet in a dark bathroom. It's possible. The probability can be calculated, but it's so unlikely that it's basically not real. Or I would just say the priors are just so arbitrary. That again, it's just there's something fishy going on. Is the point that he was trying to make. Yeah, I mean, I could go on, but there's no longer any space left. I could probably do something about that, but the video is pretty long, and I was gonna say something else, but I don't remember what it was. I mean, I could go on. Probably something about language. We'll see. Should be enough of a video, really. I veered into philosophy hard. I'm sorry I couldn't explain everything well. It's just I'm still trying to wrap my head around this stuff, and it's not easy, But I find it really interesting that, again, the fundamental idea that I've been thinking about is that society is an illusion, but it can create real things. And, society is only in our heads. And we can change our whole perception of society by just changing our perception of society. Like, we can change the whole substance of society by just changing what's in our heads about society. Right? That, the only way people can abuse you verbally or put you down verbally is if you perceive what they say as abusive. But if you just say, I don't give a fuck, it's not there anymore. The judgment is not there anymore if you don't let it be there. So this kind of philosophizing can actually lead you to some very useful conclusions. Like, I just don't give a fuck anymore about what people have to say, really. I don't care. One guy tried to shame me a while ago because you don't have a job, whatever. He saw me walking on the fucking side of the road while he drove a car. I'm like, who cares? Fuck you. Why is it bad to walk on the side of the road without a car? Go blow me. I don't give a fuck. Everybody can blow me. My family, everybody. I don't give a damn. Just say what you think. You're free on this fucking planet in some sense. I've run out of space. Bye.